see today, and the Climate Justice Committee is hosting this, along with the WAM, Women Against Military Madness, and Military Madness Against the Earth Subcommittee. And we've got 5 panel speakers. And there'll be a short question and answer afterwards. Please hold your questions to 1 minute. No manifestos, please. And we'll take it from there. And our first speaker today is...
Come in this way.
Thank you.
John LaForge. He is the co-director of NukeWatch and the editor of NukeWatch Quarterly. Take it away, John.
Yeah, if you haven't got a copy of the latest newsletter, there's some here. Always at the May Day bookstore and several spots around town. Thanks for coming out today on a rainy day. I'm glad to be here with the climate justice gangsters because at NukeWatch we work against nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons, transportation of radioactive waste, generation of radioactive waste, and try to educate people about the dangers of radioactive pollution. We have a hot issue right here in Minneapolis, St. Paul right now because of the Monticello reactor, 38 miles northwest of here on the Mississippi River, which the magnificent river supplies drinking water to all the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul and its suburbs, and 35 million people downstream as well. This reactor has been polluting the Mississippi River for 53 years now. It operated first in 1971, been operating on and off ever since then. There's only 2 other reactors in the United States that are older than this jalopy. Had a series of bad accidents, some deliberate releases of radioactively contaminated water to the Mississippi, and several accidental ones as well. Most recently, and most of you here have heard about this, but it's been out of the news now for months. A major leak from underground pipes at this reactor. The company XL Energy, which operates the reactor as Northern States Power Minnesota, acknowledged in November of 2022, it told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and nobody else, that it had leaked 400,000 gallons of highly tritiated water, that's water contaminated with radioactive tritium, directly into the groundwater under the plant, which moves toward the Mississippi River. Much later, December of last year, after studying the spill or the leak for a long while, they admitted that rather than 400,000 gallons, they actually spilled or leaked 829,000 gallons of tritiated water into the groundwater there. We've been waiting ever since then because during this there was a 4-month period, December when it informed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the leak, and March of 2023 when it informed the public. In that time, we call that the hush-hush period. XL applied to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a second 20-year operating license extension. It should have moved. The company originally had a 40-year license. It was to shut down and retire and be decommissioned in 2010. It won in 2006 a 20-year license extension. It's allowed to operate now until 2030. It wants to operate until 2050, when it will be 80 years old. Now, there's no single reactor in the United States anywhere that's operated for 80 years. They were designed to operate for 40. Now, this company and the nuclear industry in general will say that tritium is a mildly radioactive form of hydrogen. And And that language is designed to put all your minds at ease. We have a little office joke about tritium. Anybody know how you get tritium off your face? You can't. We like dark humor at the office. Tritium is very, very difficult to study, and so the industry doesn't spend any time or money doing it. It's one of the least investigated pollutants in the whole nuclear industry, and which allows the industry to carry on saying that it's just mildly radioactive. We do know, thanks to Arjun Makajani and the work of his organization, the Institute for Environmental and Energy Research in Tacoma Park, Maryland, that tritium, if it's ingested, inhaled as gas, or eaten on vegetables, or in the water that you drink, it crosses the placenta. And what hasn't been studied is the effect of tritium on infants, on fetuses, the effects on pregnancy, especially the likelihood that it causes problems or abnormalities in pregnancies. Of course, those are on the rise all over the United States, but there's no direct way to correlate that to tritium contamination in the water, except to note that every time there's a spill, every time there's a leak or an accident, the industry, and you know this from hearing about Fukushima in Japan, likes to say, well, this is routinely released into the water by every single nuclear reactor in the world. Well, there's 440 of them operating at the moment. So this is a radioactive pollutant that is increasing in its the amount that's being released every single day. So this company that wants a 20-year license extension has now issued an environmental impact statement. On your chairs when you walked in, I left you a little flyer. I'd like to ask you all to follow through with a little work assignment. It won't take much time. We can comment on this environmental impact statement. And you don't have to read all 422 pages that they like to overwhelm us with. Because our organization, our website, by Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll have some draft comments that you can just copy and paste and send along with your additional condemnation of this idea, this dangerous and provocative idea to run this machine until it's 80 years old. In this draft EIS, which we've had a little short look at, we only got word of it on the 24th, even though it was released on the 19th, it admits outright that this leak that happened to 800,000 gallons likely reached the Mississippi River. This has been denied over and over again in public by these NRC officials, by the Exelon officials, whenever they're in front of the Associated Press or the WCCO cameras. They'll say right for the public to digest that this can't reach the Mississippi River. President of the company, Chris Clark, says there's no way this could reach the Mississippi River. But if it does, it would dissipate right away. Now you look at the word dissipate, and it means to disappear. So he's lying outright about what happens. You can't remove tritium from the water. It's a radioactive form of hydrogen. It becomes the water. Our bodies are, how much of our body is water? It's over 80%, isn't it?
Just go to the WAM Facebook
Tritium,
page.
if you ingest
It's also
it in
on
water,
Instagram,
spreads
I
through
guess,
our body
but still.
to every organ. And that is a risk. And the environmental impact statement is supposed to address these kinds of risks in order to give the public a reasonable way to decide whether it's a good idea to extend the license or not. And so, as I said, we'll have some draft comments after perusing this 400-page document that's available, and you can, by June 10th, please, by June 10th, just send an email, even if you don't want to do formal comments, do a one-paragraph. This is the third oldest reactor in the country. It's got pollution accidents galore. You can read all about it on Wikipedia. And it doesn't deserve another 20 years of operation.
That's right. Yeah.
There was a special request. What's my time now, Doctor?
You have 11 minutes.
Left?
Or, no, I'm sorry.
4 minutes.
You have 6 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. Well, if you have questions about this, we'll take some questions at the end. I know our fine director of the May Day bookstore here, Craig, asked me to say a few things about my experiences in Germany trying to rid Europe of the U.S. nuclear weapons that are deployed in Europe. We work at NukeWatch against both nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. A lot of people don't know that the U.S. has about 100 or 150 nuclear weapons still deployed in Western Europe in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear proliferation is to give nuclear weapons to other countries, and that's what the United States has been doing for decades, while claiming that it's in perfect compliance with the treaty. We have these B-61 gravity bombs, old-fashioned unguided gravity bombs that are either 3 times the Hiroshima force or 11 times. And there's a broad campaign across Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Turkey, and Italy to get these U.S. nuclear weapons returned to the U.S. permanently. The campaign's very active in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Italy in particular. And I've had terrific fun of helping organize U.S. delegations of peace activists over the protest at the Bukel Air Base, which has 20 of these bombs. And they have involved a lot of civil resistance at the base. You're familiar with civil disobedience at these military and weapons contractors in this country. Same process has gone on over there, where we fight against the deployment in the courtroom, saying that we weren't there to violate the law, we're there to uphold the law. The treaties, Article 1 says you can't transfer weapons to another country. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, Article 2 says you can't receive nuclear weapons from another country. So the judges say, that's way out of our pay grade, you'll just have to appeal that. So we have appealed these cases many times in Germany and have failed all the way to the German Supreme Court, and in consequence of that, 5 of the activists there, including myself, have appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, which, if your state courts have all been exhausted, you can appeal to, claiming that your trial was unfair. And that's what we say by the judges refusing to hear about the treaty law that controls this deployment. They prevented us from presenting a legitimate defense. They refused to hear our expert witnesses. So we're waiting to hear from the European Court, which is in Strasbourg, France, about whether they will consider these appeals, especially in the midst of this war in Ukraine, where the U.S. has these weapons right up under Russia's nose, and now Russia has done a copycat action and placed some of its nuclear weapons in Belarus. So the provocative nature, the destabilizing character of this forward deployment is in front of the courts, and they can say something about it, and they can help de-escalate the situation in Ukraine by forcing the removal of these weapons. So that's again part of what's going on in Germany right now. One of our colleagues, Susan Crane from California, has just been sentenced to 229 days in jail in Germany for doing 6 of these protests at the Bukel Air Base. She'll be starting that in June. And again, on our website, you can check it out, get an address for her, and send her a postcard, some color in these very drab prisons where she'll be doing some time there. I myself did 50 days there in a German prison camp last winter, and it's a very interesting experience because compared to the county jails and the federal joints in this country, the Germans learned a lot after what happened in World War II, and they treat inmates rather well now. There was if you're a minimum security prisoner there, in a given year you can be excused and go home for 7 weekends in a given year. Now this applies to you no matter how long your sentence is. So I had a 50-day sentence, 7 weeks, right? I went home every weekend. kind of like summer camp. One weekend we flew to Oslo for a ICANN conference, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and fly back and go back to prison camp. So I highly recommend Civil Disobedience in Germany. Well, thanks. I hope you'll all remember to send in a comment to the NRC and complain about this rotten reactor here. There's one thing that they did when they said that it won't reach the Mississippi River. You can see the green line on this picture. They slammed a steel wall into the ground between the reactor and the Mississippi to reduce the risk. No, they didn't say prevent the water from getting to the Mississippi. It's just this public relations effort. It kind of looks good, doesn't it, on paper? It went 40 feet in the ground. Now, how deep does groundwater actually go?
I think it goes further than 40 feet.
Maybe 40. Maybe 40.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, next up, we have Joe Vitale from East Phillips Neighborhood Institute. Joe is one of the leaders of the fight to stop the demolition of the Rook Depot. Made his victory in the climate justice movement. Actually got something done, which city government, state government, the Minnesota Protection Control Agency, they all say, oh, there's nothing we can do. Well, and East Phillips, who keeps us safe?
We keep us safe. Well, I first have to say thank you so much, WHAM and the Climate Justice Committee. I think it's amazing that we keep continuously showing up for each other in solidarity in different movements, because one thing we ask ourselves in East Phillips, or have continuously asked ourselves, especially after our great victory, is what is our responsibility to movement even after we've won? And in my conversation, and kind of like, kind of what you already know, there's a lot to do. But in talking about, these demons, they work hard. But what I've seen, especially from like our youth and just like from the CJC and other like actors at that, is that we work harder and we get it done. And we get it done because we know the facts. But more importantly, we know what I am seeing in movement is that we're learning how to be in community with each other again. And we're learning that because what we're seeing, in Gaza, but also what we saw in East Phillips, is that this system has deliberately tried to destroy what it means to be a community. Places, especially under colonial control, like the United States, or places that are under imperialist occupation, like we see in Palestine, they're not done in a vacuum, nor are they done by accident. They are planned. Haphazardly, mind you, but they are planned. And like that, East Phillips was strategized in the 1900s, starting with it being yellow lining. For those of you who don't know what red lining and yellow lining is, it's just a way, in the 1900s, they were trying to increase home ownership, and what they did was like they had the big straw hats. They were like, where will be the priority places? And it was the white majority areas, especially around nice places like by lakes and such. Some of them were then redesigned, like Nokomis. Like that's not a natural lake that was created. We didn't even call it Nokomis, but that's a different conversation. East Phillips was yellow line, meaning we don't quite want good interest rates, loans coming here, but we'll allow some development. So think of it like that. And that's what enabled industry to come in. And you'll see that, especially when you overlay red line maps in Minneapolis with kind of the areas that have some of the worst pollution in the state, like Minneapolis, and North Minneapolis, or South Minneapolis, like East Phillips, and North Minneapolis, especially around Upper Harbor, you see some of the worst asthma rates and lead and cancer rates in the state. And again, this isn't done by accident. And it wasn't just about money. It was about where to put people we don't like, meaning non-white folks, meaning non-rich folks. You always have to bring it back to class. Don't let people leave it at like a race war. It's about that, but so much more. In East Phillips, it was even on its own map. It was a space. It was a place for the undesirables in Minneapolis. Okay, in the 1900s, as you can imagine, you had immigrants, which is exactly what it was intended for. Black folks, and over the years, like the demographics have changed, but the population has remained the same. And let me explain that. Like, we had Eastern Europeans back in the 1900s because of the immigration wave that was coming through. Now it looks like Latinx folks escaping horrible climate change, and you know, I've even heard just like sexual like liberation coming through. It's like, you know, I like that little fluff, not a fluff piece, but that good piece from NPR that we're like a trans haven now, and I like to hear that, you know. But in Latinx countries, it can be really tough, and that's why folks are coming here. But bringing it back, though, where we have these populations of like who gives a shit, enabled pesticide plants to come into the neighborhood. It allowed a place called Smith Foundry, we'll talk about that later, to come into the neighborhood. Bituminous roadways, and this industrial sector has remained since. And again, nothing is done by accident. Everything is planned. The city had its kind of shithole because these uses are necessary for a society. You know, I can't agree with like what went into the pesticides, but how it was managed is what I had a problem with. I don't have problems with good paying jobs in foundries because that's how we get our light poles, but I have a problem when it's emitting lead and it's in my neighborhood.
Nope.
Or in a densely populated neighborhood. Nobody should have their air compromised. The same with bituminous roadways. And we've had these polluters going 100 years now. They're still here. In fact, they've gotten all the protection they want, especially from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, where they created a special law called the amortization law, meaning you have existed so long that like getting you up to code, especially with you know, modern filtration systems, modern policy, will just be too expensive. We don't want you to leave. So we're going to create a special clause for you that you can just ignore city code. And city code, exactly. And city code has changed over the years.
Yeah.
You know, it's actually illegal to develop a foundry like Smith in Minneapolis today.
Yep.
But that code allows Smith Foundry, or that policy allows Smith Foundry basically through your code. The state's protecting us. And what we saw was that it was negligence from the PCA.
Absolutely.
Nobody cared. And again, it goes back to who's living there. Today you have one of the largest urban Indian community in Little Earth living there. You have a big population of East Africans, Latinx folks, in our white island. You have 4 working class people living here, mostly renters. Meaning you have a diverse community who, you know, might not be able to communicate with each other. They're 4 working class, so organizing is really difficult. And then you have this city and the state just pounding in. I grew up in East Phillips, and I can assure you, like, folks just want to live normal life. They just want to work, come home to their families, have dinner. They just want to be it. But imposed upon them is the colonial project. And it first came from Native Americans with land dispossession. And now it's the maintaining of the lie, the American dream. And for some people to win, many people have to lose.
That's right.
And that's what East Phillips is for this city. Ironically, when you look on Cedar Avenue, you look down the street, you'll see one of the most expensive condos in Minneapolis, where one condo goes for $1 million. Just when you're on Cedar Avenue, walk and just look down, you'll see it just burgeoning, and it's insane. It's a tale of two cities, but it's on purpose. The brother talk with NukeWatch. I hope you do write that email for the EIS. It makes a fucking difference. In talking about our recent victory, especially with Roof Depot, back in 2020, the city was trying to expand its public works department, which was allowed to be built there, where they've stored a quarter of their diesel trucks and their plows and their equipment that they do normal city maintenance stuff, like how they fill potholes. Again, necessary goods for the public. But does it belong in a densely populated neighborhood with disproportionate asthma rates? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. But it has its function. And so the city wanted to, so in came the problem, right? But back to, on the EAW, the city wanted to demolish the Roof Depot project to expand its public works to centralize all of its trucks, which would exacerbate the problem that we already have. And the city saw no problem because at a whole, the pollution levels for the city would go down. But where would they increase? East Phillips.
Yeah.
And it was a justified loss in the city's eyes. But with that EAW, we weaponized it. Thousands of emails came and complaints came for the city's project. It's the most on record for any city project. They never saw anything quite like it. And I owe a debt of gratitude to Money, Power, Land, Solidarity. Shout out to Jake. And shout out to the organizers that made that happen. And there was a reason for why the community weaponized and fought that. And it's why I'm here too. We're at the precipice of like a big victory. And I don't know if you can quite call it a victory because even after we built the community project, we still have to deal with the institution that will always hound us for audits. And we've made some political enemies. We don't fuck with a $120 million project and get away with it. I can just assure you that, but fucking we're doing that. So Roof Depot. It was a former warehouse where it stored the pesticides that I talked about. And in the early 2000s, the owner wanted to leave. I've heard many different reasons, right? I've heard that he was dumping chemicals and he got caught, so he was getting fined. I've heard that he just wanted to go because he was getting older and he wanted a paycheck. And the community had been slowly building a relationship with him because, well, we were trying to do that with everybody. Smith Foundry, Bituminous, the city, just, hey, if you guys are deciding to sell, let us know. Because we know what we need. And same with this owner. Also just saying, get the fuck out too, mind you. And the owner was like, yeah, let's do it. Verbal agreement. Unbeknownst, and again, it's always a plan, right? Unbeknownst to this community, the city already planned 20 years before that they were going to expand its public works department using Roof Depot. Now, one time did they communicate that to the neighborhood. And before the community could close its deal with this owner, the city threatened eminent domain and took it. Yeah. And then started the fight. Years, ups and downs. You know, I don't want to get too much into the nuance because you're all there, right? Did EP and I win? Did we lose? Both, all the time. But we kept the dream because, you know, in it were the hopes of the neighborhood. We came together as a community, as diverse and different thinking as we are. Humanity came out, meaning we wanted clean air. We wanted jobs because we've been disinvested from for decades. We saw renewable energy even back then in early 2000s is the way to go. And we needed just public space to be. We needed that third space, like what we're dealing with right now. Right here, like this.
Yeah.
And we fought for that. And we continue to fight for that. Because, you know, and I could talk about what Roof Depot should be and what it will become, but really it's about the movement. Because I see what we've been able to build, especially together, and how it's that energy is circulated where it's needed to go, especially with the young folks at the U of M and Hamlin now. Because Roof Depot came to an occupation, and much like then, similar to now, nothing's changed. We have to take space. Because again, we're on the legal land, legally stolen land, stolen lives. And these demons don't react to kindness, meaning nice little letters, trying to like wish them over, data doesn't matter. You have to throw down. And so, we'll talk with your Q&A about the indigenous perspective of it all, but we're an ally in this. Because we have colonialism happening here, and the liberation of Palestinian people is the blueprint for us here in Turtle Island. And so, we'll continue to show up for you all, and we'll leverage our culture and our teaching, as it all comes back to that. But keep building that humanity and that community, because that's how we really are accountable to each other. All right, y'all. That's it for now.
Thanks, Joe, for that brief rundown on the fight to stop Roof Depot. I'm sure that there may be questions for Joe and what we can do going forward. Next up is our very own Climate Justice Committee member, Kay Lerohl, and she is a PhD candidate.
Masters.
Oh, master's candidate in agricultural science, sorry. I had a more elevated understanding, sorry. Anyway, Kate, take it away.
So there's no question that the world's demand for food is increasing with the population. It is perhaps one of the greatest threats of the climate crisis, that we have to increase food production by 60 to 70% by the middle of the century, and continue to do so after that as well. And we have to do that while we are losing valuable farmland to unsustainable import practices, to natural disasters driven by the climate crisis, and otherwise scramble to adjust cultural practices, like as in what varieties you might choose to plant in one place or another, as disease ranges shift and as climates shift into regions that they haven't had to deal with, this issue and that issue before. And so of course we can't really talk about food security, the food security that we need to build, without talking about food justice and food sovereignty. Our agricultural practices themselves are not the only things to consider as we try to make this goal. Because people that eat food are people. And they have not only a human right generally to food, but people have religions and cultures and individual needs and preferences when it comes to that food. The other main aspect of food justice, the one that I'm going to be spending most of my time on today, is that farmers are also people. They deserve a stable way of living, opportunities to forge connections to their land, and be equipped with the information, technology, and other resources that they need to accomplish this great task of feeding all of us with our diverse needs. So, unfortunately, because of financial instability, lack of access to amenities one might find in the city, And a lot of it comes down to the corporate greed of seed suppliers and food processors, etc. The family farm in the United States is becoming more and more rare, and large, fast-growing companies are really eager to pay up and expand their empires in our food systems. And so we see the decline of the family farm right here in the United States, in Minnesota, because of one face of capitalism, but we see its most extreme manifestations in U.S. imperialism abroad. And these colonization projects, like that in Palestine, pose a global level threat to food security and sovereignty for all of us. Palestine is particularly important to global food security and justice throughout human history due to its location in the Fertile Crescent. This is for a couple of reasons. So the Fertile Crescent on the kind of human social side has served as a bridge between North Africa and Eurasia, becoming a hub of civilization because of exchange of ideas and goods. Additionally, the tectonic activity in that area and made for a lot of diverse mountain ranges. So you get a lot of highlands, a lot of lowlands, a lot of very unique biomes, a lot of diversity in the biomes. Additionally, because of its location closer to the equator, it avoided a lot of ice age mass extinctions, which also allowed biodiversity to also just be massively preserved there. And it's for these reasons that the biodiversity is really key for the domesticating of the wild ancestors of things like barley and chickpeas, wheat, flax, goats and sheep that were all located there, their wild ancestors, leading to their establishment as staple crops in livestock in Palestine and then eventually spreading throughout the world. In fact, Jericho in Palestine is one of the oldest known agricultural settlements, dating back to 8,000 BCE. And by 6,000 BCE, olive trees were domesticated, and eventually sugarcane, cotton, citruses, and grapes became staples there too. So farming rights and land ownership in Palestine was largely communal for a really long time and relied on like a rotating system of responsibility for certain lands, such as like rotating. If your end goal is just productivity, there's actually no evidence that there was any kind of suffering or reduced productivity under these specific systems. But rather the benefit in the form of like a culture of cooperation and coordination and shared responsibility. Unfortunately, the Ottoman Empire sought to end this system in the mid-1800s and tried to enforce a bunch of policies to break this down that British rule would also carry on after the Ottomans' fall. To force Palestinians to formally register their land as individuals rather than communities and to give it up. So if you were not registered, as long as you paid taxes and cultivated on it, you could kind of be considered the owner. But you had to cultivate on the same land as an individual for 10 years to formally register that as your land. And lack of cultivation and registration for 3 years made it automatically state-owned. So for a time, most Palestinians didn't register their properties because they could avoid paying taxes and they could avoid mandatory military service. And also to preserve their system of collective property, to preserve their food sovereignty. And Israel has certainly taken advantage of the gray areas of these unregistered lands and use it to their benefit to claim farmlands and wildlands that were not formally owned and were used to build settlements. As of 2018, about 90% of the settlements were built on lands declared state lands based on these Ottoman laws. And Israeli settlers actually really sucked at farming itself, so badly that they had to get bailed out by big European banks. So we can kind of see that the dissolution of indigenous farmers' ways of relating to the land is inherent in the colonization, and also the colonization is an inherent threat to food security and sovereignty of the folks who farm the land, because even the colonizers couldn't maintain the total independence and food sovereignty under the systems that they built. Wow. And so this basic pattern of oppressively taking and subsequently failing the land has obviously only been exponentially exacerbated over the years of Israel's escalating violence. I mean, from the literal burning of crops and farmsteads, poisoning the soil and water and air, not only with rubble but chemical weapons, things that won't biodegrade. White phosphorus is known to bioaccumulate in fish and crustaceans, which means the levels are built up the farther down the farther up the food chain you go, and will eventually make it to human consumption levels. While it is in the soil before it's washed away, the white phosphorus will permanently alter the microbial communities on the soil that are essential for disease suppression and plant nutrition. And yeah, some of that will run off and affect the fish. I mean, and even just burning a few acres of crops can not just destroy the perfectly good human food that someone put their love and labor into, but it can decimate large populations of ecologically important small land animals or insects, pollinators, messing with all kinds of food chains from local ecosystems. So if you haven't considered these types of impacts before, you're definitely not alone. Because the erasure of global impacts on food systems in Palestine is absolutely intentional. I attended the Borlaug Dialogue this past fall, which is like a 3-day series of talks. And the theme this year was specifically how war and violent conflict impact food security. They had a lot of representation from allied nations, of course, but they did highlight some things such as a team of Vietnamese women who gave a demo on how they demine fields so that they can be farmed again. Afghani women were highlighted for their efforts and successes in bringing back grape vineyards and other fruit cultures back to rebuild their economy after the United States was done with them. We're allowed to know about all these food injustices as long as it's long enough in retrospect. So, you know, that way a white European lady, and this is a true story, can sell a book about how she helped all those poor brown people by giving them money to put themselves in danger to explode the mines that we put there in the first place. And she'll be declared the laureate of the event for that.
Oh, wow.
I did not buy a copy. At this same event, several breakout sessions were sponsored by Israeli companies. And one of the only United States officials that spoke up on stage told not only influential politicians in the room from around the globe, businessmen and women, scientists from around the country, she not only told them, but she broadcast to millions watching over the internet that October 7th was somehow a food threat security to Israel. And so the imperialists do not want us connecting the dots between their proxy genocide and the threat that it poses to our planet and our food systems, and ultimately like the survivability of the entire human race. They don't want us thinking that it could be our own agricultural systems in the US destabilizing next, but they already are. I mean, heck, that destabilization started when my great, I think it's 8 greats, grandfather came from Norway and bought freshly stolen indigenous land from the state to grow crops on. So we really can't afford to let these conditions continue. So I want to encourage everyone to organize. We need to gain the power to radically and deeply systemically transform. Hit me up. While our struggles are all very connected, like whatever particular issue you're passionate about, I might have like an org to plug you into. As much as I would love to see literally every single one of you on Tuesday at 7 p.m. at 4200 Cedar at a Climate Justice Committee meeting. But thanks so much for your time, and I'll hand it back over to Ken.
Next up we have Donia from the Students for Justice in Palestine. So we're hoping that Donia can help us understand how the heroic Palestinian fight against genocide and apartheid will help us fight the climate crisis going forward. So Welcome, Donia. Thank you very much.
Follow the cord.
Tracy,
She was
the
there.
DCA
Hi everyone, my name is Donia. I am the president for Students for Justice in Palestine at the University of Minnesota. And I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about the environment and how we are all connected to Israeli apartheid and the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Before the inception of Zionism and the state of Israel, the establishment of the state of Israel, Palestinians have long lived sustainably and in harmony with the natural environment in Palestine, and they've maintained the indigenous landscape of Palestine by growing a variety of crops like wheat, watermelon, citrus, grapes, and olives, which are also very central to Palestinian identity and culture. But since 1948, when the State of Israel was established and where they stole more than 4 million acres of Palestinian land and uprooted and displaced over 750,000 Palestinians and have not given them the right to return back to their homelands, the Israeli state has been engaged and involved in damaging and destroying Palestine and the environment in order to exploit Palestinian natural resources and to erase Palestinian existence completely. In 1967, more than 247,000 acres of Palestinian land were stolen by Israel, and this land was stolen so that illegal Israeli Jewish settlements would be built on top of this Palestinian land. And the illegal apartheid wall is an example of how Palestinians were forced out of their homes, and this wall was built in place of those Palestinian homes. And Israel has been involved in destroying and bulldozing thousands of Palestinian homes and farmland, and the environmental effects of what Israel has done include deforestation, soil erosion, a loss of biodiversity, and severe flooding, especially due to the illegal apartheid wall. Israel uproots trees and destroys the natural habitats in Palestine in order to erase our existence. In 1948, after the Nakba, Israel uprooted native trees, including olive trees, hawthorns, oaks, figs, and almond trees, and they replaced them with over 4 million non-native European trees and European species that were not native to the land. And because they brought in these non-native species into Palestinian land, these species and these plants were more susceptible to causing droughts, to causing wildfires in Palestine and across the Levant region. Additionally, Zionist organizations like the Jewish National Fund, which is an organization for the sole purpose of facilitating the theft of Palestinian land and the displacement of the Palestinian people, in order to advance the racist and colonial project of expanding Jewish settlements into Palestine. They stole a bunch of Palestinian land, displaced a bunch of Palestinian people off their homes and villages, and brought in illegal Israeli settlers to occupy and to live on that land. So the Jewish National Fund, that is an organization that was founded in the 1900s, way before the Nakba, and because of the concept of Zionism. And this by the United States to help facilitate Europeans to go move into Palestine and take up land. Additionally, Israeli settlers are backed and supported by the Israeli army, and they frequently attack Palestinians, Palestinian farmers, especially during the olive harvest, and just in between August 2020 and August 2021, Israeli soldiers and settlers destroyed more than 19,000 Palestinian olive trees in occupied West Bank. And this widespread destruction of olive trees is a key strategy in the settler colonial project to push Palestinians off of their homes and to expand the illegal settlements into Palestine. And it has led to large desertification, land degradation, urbanization, and soil erosion in Palestine. Another way that Israel engages in environmental injustices is through their restrictions and preventing Palestinians from access to water and clean drinking water. Palestinians in occupied West Bank and Gaza do not have access to water. They restrict them and prohibit them from drilling water wells and installing water pumps, and they deny them also access to the Jordanian River and from any fresh water springs that are in the occupied Palestinian region. Israel also steals more than 80% of the water in occupied West Bank, and they use it for their illegal settlements. They give it to the illegal settlers to have an abundance of water to fill up their pools, to clean, to cook, to drink, and to use, while Palestinians are prohibited and have a severe lack of access to water. Not only are Palestinians in the West Bank prevented from this lack of access to clean water, but these illegal Israeli settlements produce so much pollution and contamination and so much wastewater that what the Israeli regime or the Israeli government does, instead of treating that wastewater in their regions and preventing that wastewater from going into Palestinian territories, what they do is they take that wastewater and they dump it onto Palestinian land and to Palestinian villages, so that Palestinians are now risked with the responsibility of dealing with the contaminated water, and this increases the health risks and the disease and the pollution that that waste created for the Palestinians. So that's a little bit about the West Bank. Now we'll talk about the Gaza Strip. Since before October 7th, Gaza has been significantly impacted by the consequences of Israeli apartheid and occupation. And Gaza faced severe water shortage, and before the occupation and blockade imposed in Gaza in 2007, Gaza has historically received their water from the West Bank and the south of Palestine. But since the siege of Gaza, they've relied only on underground water. But this underground water is still not clean enough for Palestinians. This underground water, because it is the only resource, Palestinians have had to overpump the water, which results in contamination of the water with sewage water. An additional experience that Palestinians in Gaza face that contribute to environmental injustices is the significant and chronic electricity shortages in Gaza, which impact the ability to treat wastewater and to provide water filtration services. I visited Gaza back in 2022, and they regularly cut the water with the electricity. Electricity would only come on for 3 or 4 hours during the day, and you would have to schedule your entire washing, cleaning, cooking during those 3 and 4 hours. They also shut down, when there is no electricity, there is no ability to filter the water and to clean the water. Palestinians experienced severe shortage of water. They already have shortage of water, but on top of this, there's the electricity and water shortage when Israel decides to cut it off during specific times of the day. That contributed to even more and exacerbated that issue. Palestinians in Gaza keep jugs of water and they store it, but not all Palestinians have access to that to be able to gather that water and collect it in jugs. I know my family was able to collect jugs and store water in case the water was cut off. But not all Palestinians are able to do that in Gaza. And this water can quickly run out. Additionally, there is a lack of adequate waste management infrastructure in Gaza, and this leads to the pollution in the air, soil, and water. And this accumulates in the streets and in open spaces. So in Gaza, there are a lot of garbage in the streets and not enough infrastructure to clean that trash and to prevent the sewage water from being in open public spaces. So this contributes to the poor overall public and environmental health in Gaza. Also, the Israeli regime prohibits and prevents this valuable material and supplies and infrastructure from entering Gaza. And they check every single material that is entered Gaza, and they can prevent, and they do prevent that material from entering Gaza. So Palestinians do not have access to those resources. To have clean water and sanitation facilities. And just since the start of this genocide, already we see how much destruction and degradation Israel has committed on the Gaza Strip. 40% of agricultural land is destroyed. That is the last estimate I got. I think that is actually more, to be honest. And just in North Gaza, 90% of the agricultural land is destroyed. Additionally, 1/3 of the greenhouses are destroyed. And the use of chemical weapons like white phosphorus, which are banned by international law, have caused not only severe burns and respiratory issues for Palestinians, but they also have long-term impacts on the environment because these chemicals leave a huge percentage of toxins in the soil and the water, and this will affect the generations to come. Also, those chemicals that come out of those bombs and weapons that Israel uses increase the level of CO2. And since the beginning of the genocide, the Israeli regime has emitted over 1.92 million of CO2. And this increase in CO2 leads to the climate crisis that we are in, and it will exacerbate it significantly in ways that we have never seen before. Another thing that this climate crisis has caused in Gaza is an increase in epidemics. There is extreme excess of sewage, waste, and pollution, especially in highly concentrated and densely populated areas like schools and refugee camps and shelters. And this resulted in epidemics where Palestinians are experiencing diseases and conditions like hepatitis A. And this is due to the lack of sanitary conditions and lack of resources in Gaza. So what Israel is doing in Gaza is a clear indication of environmental genocide, in which people have called ecocide. And they are deliberately making Palestinian land infertile and inhabitable. And it will be extremely difficult for Palestinians in Gaza to regrow and to rebuild when the genocide ends. But even though what is happening in Gaza is not, the destruction of the Israeli regime is not new, we have never experienced as Palestinians this amount of genocide, this amount of massacres, this on our people since the inception of Zionism and since the establishment of the Israeli state. And I don't think any other nation has experienced the amount of destruction and genocide that we are witnessing for the past 7 months. I want to also mention greenwashing. In the context of settler colonialism, greenwashing refers to the practice of presenting colonial projects which involve land exploitation and land grabs as environmentally friendly or sustainable, but this tactic is just used to cover up the colonial agenda and negative environmental impacts of these settler colonial projects. Israel engaged in greenwashing by making land grabs and making land grabs and making Palestinian ethnic cleansing seem necessary and justifiable to construct sustainable and more eco-friendly nature and develop and buildings. Another point is that Israel is one of the world's top weapons importer, and they also have weapons companies and buildings in occupied Palestine that are directly involved in the apartheid and genocide of the Palestinian people. So when we as University of Minnesota students demand that our university ban their study abroad programs, we are saying that these programs and these institutions are involved in the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, and they are directly involved in environmental degradation and the ethnic cleansing and the displacement of the Palestinian people. So just to sum up everything, it is clear that the environmental and climate crisis that we are experiencing in the world right now is a concept that is rooted in the dehumanization and hierarchy and disposition of land, especially indigenous land, where our lives are seemed less valuable and less important and less protected than other settler colonial groups and communities. And this makes capital and colonial projects seem more important than indigenous life. And historically, Native people have always been portrayed as barbaric, savage, and uncivilized, which has enabled and helped perpetuate settler colonial projects and the exploitation of indigenous land, and has made us as indigenous people seem disposable to these colonial powers. And what is happening in Palestine reminds me a lot about what has happened on Turtle Island, including in the East Phillips neighborhood, and also in Guam, where they displaced thousands of indigenous people to use their land to test nuclear bombs on that land.
Yeah.
And since then, they've never repaid them. They never, the Guam community has never been able to go back to their land. And this includes other islands in the Pacific, like the Marshall Islands and such. I think I will end by saying that while we as Palestinians and indigenous to Palestinian land, we are experiencing the most brutal and genocidal regime and campaign of murder against our people, we are a people that love to live, and we are a people that are in harmony with our land, and we will always be in harmony with our land. And I think a lot about the phrase or the saying that what Israel is doing to Palestine, no indigenous person or no indigenous community to a land would ever do if they were truly indigenous to the land. They would never destroy the environment and treat it the way that the Israeli regime has done to Palestine. And these imperial and colonial powers will continue to destroy our land. They will continue to dispossess and displace and expel indigenous people from so long as we as the international community allow them. So we need to continue to step up and to be in community and in solidarity with each other. There's huge ways that these colonial powers try to divide us and try to divide us, but we need to be in solidarity with each other. And we, the people, have the power to do that. They should not continue to treat Native people as disposable and exploitable. And as Indigenous people, and in solidarity with each other, we have the ability and the power to fight against colonialism and imperialism. So thank you.
Palestine will live forever.
So next up we have Ann Martin from Women Against Military. Martinson, sorry. From the Women Against Military Madness, End the Military Madness Against the Earth, and Rise Up Time. So, Ann, here's your seat. Come on up.
Thank you. Pull this chair up.
Oops.
I have to have a high chair. And you will notice that I'm going to read my talk. I'm sorry I can't do it extemporaneously, but I have to say my age shows because I'm reading it from paper. So I wanted to talk quite a bit about internationalism, and I'm following 4 incredible speakers. So
Yeah, that's right.
I will do the best I can. First of all, I entitled my talk, "Is the Empire Really Done?" So if Western powers lose the war in Ukraine, will Western hegemony die? As Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of England's UK, has predicted. In his geopolitical economy report, Ben Norton discusses Boris Johnson's point of view, which, while published in a right-wing British tabloid, is not exactly propaganda. Rather, it is a belief strongly held by Johnson and also by Biden and company, as well as right-wing Republicans, and is driving the U.S. Congress to grant billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine and now also to Israel and Taiwan. As Norton states, it is only the global north, or collective west, that has imposed sanctions on Russia. North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and U.S. allies in Japan, South Korea, and China's Taiwan province, which is governed by pro-Western political forces. It appears that the continued funding of the Ukraine war and also of Israel in the Middle East, in spite of worldwide opposition to the genocide, which we just heard about today, and all the reasons that we have to continue opposing it, is clearly about hegemonic domination, also described by a more old-fashioned word, empire. Norton's article expands on these comments by Johnson, but does not actually raise the concept, at least by name, of the petrodollar that is driving the wars and the economy. It's still the economy, stupid, might be said. Norton also doesn't note in any detail the interconnectedness between the wars and the petrodollar that drives the U.S. and world economy if the West dominates. What complicates things exponentially is the climate crisis and the on-the-ground battles for oil resources and other precious metals, especially in Africa. As long as the West dominates, it has access to these resources. With the neo-colonialism that dominates the relationship of the multinational corporations and with the countries of the global south. Some of these multinationals are based in the U.S., others are from other countries. Norton, of course, could not write in any depth about these connections, and even though he recognizes them. That's a whole book, not a short article, but he does recognize them. In the anti-war pro-peace movement, we often complain that we just don't understand the motivation of the continued funding of the wars and of genocide, of course, in Palestine, when in America our people are suffering. And when they say the economy is healthy, what they mean is the petrodollar still dominates and drives the economy. As Ken Pentel of the Economy Democracy Network explains, the petrodollar is at the root of the economy, driving everything from transportation to food, you heard about that, to plastic, to housing, and so much more of what we produce. Nationwide, people are attempting to address these problems in their communities by challenging the system piecemeal, including the financial system that supports it all, by calling out the banks and the corporations they fund that dominate, while the CEOs and stockholders thrive at the expense of their workers and are challenged by union movements, and also by addressing poverty, hunger, and homelessness for so many Americans who are not benefiting from an economy that basically makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. It is not just the U.S. that's involved. France's Total, I believe you pronounce it, Energies, and China are promoting building an oil pipeline across Central Africa, perpetuating the petrodollar economy, adding to fossil fuel pollution, ignoring the climate crisis, which, along with nuclear war, is the greatest threat to humanity at the present time. We are beyond stopping climate change, but it still needs to be addressed. So the whole economy, built on the petrodollar, is threatened, and U.S. and Western hegemony is threatened if the U.S. withdraws funding from Ukraine, next to Russia, Israel in the Middle East, and Taiwan next to China. But if we don't do something about this worldwide pollution, along with other Western countries and allies, we endanger the world because of the climate crisis, which is in the process of enveloping us all. It is the U.S. military, as I think most of you know, that's the greatest polluter in the world, with our 800 plus bases worldwide, a number that's growing fast by building new bases in Africa and the South Pacific, not including the U.S., where there's at least one in every state. The worst of the polluting by fossil fuels and methane, and by the U.S. military, as documented and discussed by Nada Crawford with the Brown Institute study, as evidence. The U.S. military fuels the climate crisis, and Stop the War, Save the Earth is a challenge by groups such as Veterans for Peace, Women Against Military Madness, and others. There's a degrowth movement, DEGROWTH. In this case, lying down and playing dead is not the answer, as many communities around the country and world and see and are acting, even if not seeing the full connections. We do know what is at stake. Justice at the Heart of Climate Activism is the title of an article in Yes Magazine that emphasizes intersectionality and connections. Women-led groups such as the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and Intersectional Environment have an intersectional understanding of climate activism. To quote Vivian Huang of the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the lives of our members, like the lives of all people, are impacted by many intersecting issues. Members don't just care about the air pollution impacting their health. They care about the economic opportunities, access to livelihoods, and addressing the racial injustice that they see. Not just self-identified environmentalists, but also housing advocates, food sovereignty activists, engineers, doctors, nurses, artists, poets, anyone who cares about people and the planet. So when people are talking about siloed issues, they may not think of housing as an environmental issue, but supporting people's ability to stay in their homes without fear of eviction, gentrification, unaffordable energy or insurance bills, or unsafe conditions like polluted air debris, demonstrates the many ways that racial justice, economic justice, and climate justice intersect. Real safety comes from us having what we need. It comes from our communities having stable housing, good jobs, health care, connection, and cohesion and collaboration. Climate justice will come from affirming the rights of political, economic, and cultural self-determination of all people. Climate justice does not come from neoliberal capitalism on steroids, including the use of fossil fuel, and not from a gigantic military buildup the world over that exacerbates the climate crisis and puts all our lives in danger. Scholar, activist Henry Giroux calls upon us to see the international connections, the intersectionality, and the need for connection and collaboration. He says, power is global and politics is local. That must change. We need a new language for understanding new global power formations, as well as new international modes of politics to fight them. Understanding that neoliberalism is opposite of both true liberalism and also socialism, even though there are differences between those two things, they're still both in opposition, total opposition to these neo-capitalist, liberal capitalists who don't care. They're the ones who don't care. Social movements must move outside of national boundaries and join with others across the globe to fight the savagery of neoliberal global politics. And central to such a task is the work of intellectual, artists, cultural workers, and others who can fashion new tools and social movements in the fight against the current anti-democratic threats being imposed all over the globe. That's a huge challenge, and people in this room are already working on meeting it. I know that, and I was absolutely even more reinforced today. But I think that internationalism is very important, and the solidarity, whether it's solidarity or collaboration, whatever, with national, international groups. John has done that with Germany, but we need more of it in all different areas. I would like, if I may, I think I have enough time, to read a poem which was shared by Mike McDonald from chapter 27. It's not long. And it refers to pipelines, which you can substitute a lot of things in there besides pipelines. I happen to be with the Line 3 group that's still at the governor's mansion, the one on Summit, the real one. And we meet at 4 o'clock every Monday. So you're welcome to join us anytime. This poem is called Together, and it's by Maya Sophia. Mother Earth quakes, and so do we. When a pipeline is built, the earth screams, and with agony, so do we. The trauma is within our bodies, within the wind. But I have found my hope in community. Sometimes I have no words to describe when hope still lingers in the air. On a bright morning when we gather, our bodies tired from the trauma that clings to our skin. We are resilient, but wish we didn't have to be. And yet, the joy of being together is still there, no matter what. We are building community. as the wind moves through the branches of trees wiser than we are. Water passes by without a hesitation. A bird sings and you can feel its joy. No matter what, justice will be achieved. The pipelines will be stopped. The earth will heal. And harmony will weave into everything. Because no matter what, we will still try. Mother Earth shifts, and so do we. When a movement is created, the earth breathes. Thank you. One is that I made this list of resources, and there are copies on the table back there if you'd like one. But of course, I put in the URLs, but there's a sign-up sheet back there, and if you want a copy with live links, you can sign up for it back there. And I also need to say, it's been a real great pleasure to work with climate justice men, and especially with the two people on the subcommittee, Tracy Wallman and Steph. Thank you. We also have T-shirts for sale, and they are there's some on the back table, and we have some under the table. So they're $20 or negotiate. I think that's all I have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So just so everybody knows, Sue Ann was the person that came up with the idea of having this panel discussion. So thank you, Sue Ann. And we in the Climate Justice Committee thought it was a great idea. Just to have a sit down and chat about what's going on in the climate justice movement, especially since we had such significant wins of late. So, as part of the Climate Justice Committee, let me just give you a couple things that we're going to be doing in the upcoming period. First is Wednesday of this week, May 1st, at 5 p.m., there will be International Workers' Day March. And that is going to go from the burned out hull of the whole 3rd Precinct, where we will welcome people from all over the world to Minneapolis. So that's at 5 p.m. We'll march from there to the continuing education building. That's primarily because there's a strike going on in the ESPs, I think, right?
Yep.
And then from there, we're going to go to Roof Depot and Smith Foundry. So, it's like old home week. And sometime, and the next thing that we're going to be doing in the Climate Justice Committee is a book club on the Red Deal, which is basically it's from folks down in New Mexico, I think, right? The Red Nation. It's called the Red Deal: Indigenous Action to Save Our Earth.
It's up on the shelf right
It's
over
right
there.
over here.
Oh,
And so
awesome.
we're just going to have a discussion about it. We had one before, and we felt that this would be another good time to have one. So, and that'll be right here. And we will have it will be on our social media. And the last thing I want to talk about is emergency response in case the MPCA tries to sneak it under the radar, because even though their name is Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, we all know who keeps us safe?
We keep us safe.
So we're the ones that are going to have to regulate the MPCA. If they try to sneak it under the radar, we're going to have to be out there in their face. And we know that they know about us because they watch our Instagram. Okay, I don't know, are they watching us today? Anyway, so follow us on Climate Justice MN. That's Climate Justice MN, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And so now I'm going to open it up for question and answers. And if you have a specific person, that would be John LaForge from NukeWatch, Joe Vitale from EMMAE, that would be Lerohl from Climate Justice Committee, that would be Donia from Students for Justice in Palestine, and that would be Sue Ann from WAM. And I will open it up with a question specifically to Donia. It's my understanding that it's illegal for Palestinians to collect rainwater. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you fucking believe that's a bullshit? It's illegal for people in Gaza to go outside and oh, you know what? I screwed up. I'm sorry. We're passing around the donation basket for
Craig.
Mayday books.
Can I suggest that we get up and stretch a little?
Yes. Thank you.
As you pull your money out of your pocket.
Good suggestion.
Yeah.
I got 30 minutes. Okay. I hope someone's timekeeping this Q&A. Well, that's fine. I'm just used to it.
So just while everybody stretches, there's a donations basket for Mayday books for their time indulgence this afternoon.
I'll come and see you. I'll come and see you.
We
I'll
couldn't
come and
have
see you.
lots of this stuff without Mayday books being around.
Right.
Before people leave, if you'd like to get updates from NukeWatch about the campaign of Monticello or our newsletter in the mail, please sign this sheet. It'll go around. If you want the paper, put your address. If you just want email, just put your name and email. Thanks.
And the last one is right here. Where are they?
I would like to say something too, please. Well, I forgot to the NukeWatch paper, pick one up on your way out. I would like to mention that, this, has been recorded, and I don't know how Climate Justice handles theirs, but WHAM has recorded it. You can tell us what you do with yours. And it will be in a few days posted on YouTube. WHAM has a page, so you type in Women Against Military Madness, it'll take you to the page, and then on that page you will find the whole program. And there was a lot of really good detailed information given today, but it's very difficult to retain all that. So you can go and look if you have specific questions about what was said and so on, you can get the details.
Okay, so even while people are getting drinks, Kathleen, you had a question. And if you can, direct it towards somebody specific.
Okay, this is for John.
Okay.
Several years ago, I was at a peace dock at Hobgoblin Barn in Red Wing. And one of the guests on Skype was James Hansen, who thinks that nuclear power is the solution. The thing is that Larry Johnson and Roger Cuthbertson got up and argued with him, but he doesn't like to mention that he's in favor of nuclear power because people get emotional. What a bunch of shit.
That was...
And he never mentioned 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima. He didn't. I can't remember what group he's with, but God, that is just so stupid.
It is. He was with NASA.
Yeah.
You know, these are big organization thinkers. Their idea of change and progress is from the top down. And that's the only way they can think. Big machines, big organizations, the bigger the better. They don't do math very well. You can't build a reactor in time to deal with climate change. By the time you replace current reactors with new ones, the climate has gone to hell. And we can't afford nuclear reactors. They cost 10 times what solar and wind per kilowatt hour right now. Some people say more than that. So, and then there's the Achilles heel of radioactive waste. Now just think of one equation. We get 20 years extra operation out of Monticello if the NRC rubber stamps this license extension. 20 years of electricity for 1 million years of dealing with managing and paying for high-level radioactive waste. It doesn't make any sense mathematically or politically or socially or environmentally.
Which, and everyone's response to nuclear waste is, let's put it on native land.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot. That's always a good answer, yeah.
One of the things that the CJC found out right away is, you know, dealing with climate change, it's like this huge issue, right? And then you put militarism as the number one emitter, it's like, how do people feel like it's out of their hands? And I think it'd be good if each of the speakers could kind of talk about how do you overcome that? How do you address that?
Joe.
Yeah. Nothing's out of our hands. Every struggle is big, because that's what we're dealing with is climate, and we're dealing with the number one exporter of the United States besides our culture is our military, and you know it's difficult, it's hard, but what we're seeing is just there is movement to dismantling that very thing, and so it's just going in. And what we call in like Anishinaabe culture is like leaning in a good way, like moving in a good way. It's like being a good relative. And so going into these movements, joining in solidarity with our folks, and just showing up in that solidarity. But kind of what, I mean, I can't, in my answer either with, Kent being on my right here, staring me down, is like, you gotta mass mobilize your people. Like that's, like East Phillips has become a fortress, in part by CJC, like door knocking and educating folks. It involves sessions like this, but it also involves just being in community and going to your folks and just starting there. And, mobilizing them and moving from one action to the next. So it's always going to look big, and it's always going to be big. A friend of mine, and I'll leave it here, is really clarified it for me, especially with climate change, is that you got to start thinking of it like the land itself as like your mother. And what would you do to protect your own mother? Anything, right? And when you start really thinking of it like that, the actions become clear. And so, it's hard, but we're all stronger as individuals than we give ourselves credit for. And we're just stronger together, just like what Ken has said 3 times, we keep us safe.
So also I think we've got
Well, can I sit?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Joe just said a lot. I mean, he just encapsulated it. But, and I think of all my relations because and the relations are the whole living creation, not just, your family as narrowly defined. And so I think he's right, and again, we have this huge, what I see, when you think about international solidarity and how to build it, it's huge. But we do have all these communication tools. And so there's a way to do it. But some people don't understand that the issue of the Smith Foundry is related in any way to militarism, because it seems not to be. And what I was trying to explain is they're all connected, and so and when when I read that line about the air we breathe in that end of that poem, I always think of the foundry.
Yeah.
But it's wider than that too, the poem, but, I just think that we have a huge challenge ahead of us. I think that, I know that people in this room already understand a lot. I was really inspired by the walk on Saturday that had so many wonderful parts to it that brought up the connections, and that's what we have to keep doing, is making people understand that they are connected, and then to make the connections. I mean, there's a wonderful group in England called CND, or Nuclear Disarmament. It's been there for years, and I follow them on my social media because the wonderful work that they do. And I don't necessarily, if I ever went over there, I would meet them, but I mean, so I think trying to establish even those kinds of connections is important. And we just keep working. And we work in community, because Joe said it, and I've said it, and we agree.
So, sir, wait a second. So, we were gonna round robin on the panelists, and then I'll get to you, and then Roger. So, John, if you got a couple of comments on that last question?
It's overwhelming to imagine we're gonna put up a equal fight against a military machine that gets $2 billion every single day of our tax money all year round. We think of the money that our shoestring organizations survive on, the stuff we pull off and manage to get into the public eye once in a while on a couple $1,000s a year. And this military machine is gargantuan. And we can't even imagine what $2 billion it even amounts to in real terms. And yet we are going to struggle against it because it's destroying everything. And we know it on a gut level, an intellectual level, and maybe we're not going to succeed, right? We have to face that too. Well, so what we have to be prepared for on a day-to-day basis is just simply taking care of one another, being community, because we are in for a hell of a ride now. Between the pollution and the climate change and the degradation of our economy, loss of everything is what we're looking at. And what we do have each other, that is what we can count on. So we have to be prepared for medicine, for water, to take care of one another in our communities, in our relationships, in our families, and everything else is kind of pie in the sky when it comes down to it, because of the odds of success. We can predict good odds when we're taking care of our friends and our family and our community and sticking with local politics. Nothing against internationalism. I went and married a German national, and I'm as international as I can be. We aren't having a lot of success except taking care of one another.
But we need to remember,
Wait,
we are many that are
Everybody
few.
has to take their turns.
I know, but I just had to
Wait.
say that very short thing.
No.
Donia, do you have anything else that you wanted to add in that last question?
I think what everyone said is really important, and I share the same message. One thing I will say is that we as Palestinians know that we will be free and that we will be liberated soon. And I'm sure other indigenous communities know and feel the same way, that they will be free and they will be liberated soon. It is a huge struggle, and it is a huge fight, and we are standing against the strongest powers and the strongest systems are against us. But we need to use our community and our resources together to continue building. And I've seen so many communities, including the climate justice community, has rose up and has realized the intersectionality and the connection in our struggles. So we need to continue doing that, but we know that ultimately we will be free as Indigenous people.
Go ahead, ask your question.
Yes, the reason we have, we can be optimistic is that we, as human beings, we can work together, and we are working together, and we have to be optimistic. What's the alternative? We have to work together, we've got to keep going on this. This is something, it's now or never, we've got to do it. We've got, and it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't involve shooting somebody else, it involves standing up and persuading people and letting them know what they need to do to get on board so that we can all work together and get this done. Because we've all got to come together, left, right, and center. The bad guys, there's no bad guys and good guys, we're all in this together.
Yeah. Did you have a question, sir? Roger, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for John. I wanted to respond to the James Hansen controversy and talk about all the absurd.
So ask your question from John.
That using the idea of using dangerous breeder reactors to solve our climate crisis. I mean, it's just incredible, but I don't have time for that. I have a question for John about this absurd idea to modernize, replace our entire arsenal of nuclear weapons when we should really be abolishing nuclear weapons. And then what really galls me beyond that is the idea to replace all the plutonium pits and all these bombs, you know, and apparently they're not going to recycle the pits, they're going to replace them. And so, and lastly, what in the world are they going to do with all these these plutonium pits? It's so dangerous to the environment forever. So, do you know anything about this, or would you like care to react to that?
Thanks. The rebuild of the entire nuclear weapons system, not just the weapons themselves, but the factories that produce all the parts and the delivery systems, was initiated by Joe Biden and Mr. Obama, if you recall, September 2017 or 2014. It was in exchange for Obama's very limited arms control agreement with Russia. He had to trade off the Senate approval of this very limited treaty in exchange for this entire $2 trillion rebuild. So this is not just a waste of money, this is a serious crime against the United States and the world, because we don't have the money, and we shouldn't, as you say, be building new nuclear weapons. They should be decommissioned and abolished. The thing about making new plutonium pits, that's one of the most absurd things of all, because the United States has 50 metric tons of waste leftover plutonium pits. Plutonium is very hard to produce, very expensive. 50 tons of it in waste that needs to be protected against the water for 1 million years, laying around. It's in Pantex, Texas. That's where waste plutonium is stored, in bunkers now, and for the rest of time, perhaps. Maybe that's why Texas wants to secede. Who knows? But yeah, it's an endless problem. It's colossal waste, and it's not just the Republicans' fault. It's the whole interest. As Ralph Nader says, we have one political party with two right wings. And Democrats came up with it. Every administration loves this jobs program. Hopefully these weapons aren't ever going to be used, but it is a giant jobs program, the wrong one. It's not mass transit or renewable energy like we need.
Yeah. So it looks like the questions are dying away. I've got one last one here. Anybody else want to raise their hand before, because we're coming up right on 3 o'clock, so we kind of think about wrapping it up. So, yeah. Sir?
Yeah, I'll be brief, sorry. I want to kind of respond to Joe. I was at the Earth Day March and Rally at the Foundry, which was incredible. I could be there. And I work at Whittier Elementary in South Minneapolis, and we just see so many black and brown kids with asthma, other chronic conditions that we know are caused by pollution, localized pollution. So it's so local, and it's like, you just hit the nail on the head with everything. And I contrast with my upbringing, where across the river in White Highland Park, we had the Ford factory that everybody, found out was leaching lead and other chemicals into the ground. And, I was in like elementary school when that happened, but the response that we saw, which was just a huge response to completely clean the area as much as possible. And what's been built there now, after they dismantled the factory, they shut it down after 100 years of polluting the area. They shut it down, they dismantled it, and they rebuilt fancy, expensive condos and a London Byerly's and green spaces. It's like, it's possible. And we see the connections, and we see the racism and the classism that's inherent to why this is possible in one place, but not possible in
That's
another.
right.
That's right.
And it's just like hearing you speak about it, just it crystallizes it for me. So thank you. I just wanted to
And, you know, like they're on Airbnb and how they've still got plans for East Phillips.
Yeah, so, you know, it's something for all movements to remember is that, as I said right at the beginning of my speech, is that these demons work. They work hard. It's just that we work hard. And in East Phillips, despite our big victories and the ones that we will continue to have, because we have Smith Boundary led by 2-minute roadways, we have the freeways that cut through in Cedar Avenue. So there is plans for East Phillips. But the system adapts. And we've seen it. They use our terminology, solidarity, you know, woke bombs. They adapt. They try to co-opt. And so it's important for us to remain vigilant and not get complacent. Because even places like East Phillips, where we want it to be the heartbeat of revolution within the Twin Cities, meaning cultivate the community that already exists, but also welcome thinkers and activists that are going to propel movements into the next stratosphere. Because fuck me, I'm a pissant. Like Donia and them, that's the future right there. They're holding it down early. But like I mentioned, the city's already planning. There are homes for sale in East Phillips that are more expensive than I love my community, but like, damn. You know, so the city's already pivoting. They have their plan. They see a shiny new building, so push out the working class people that made it what it is, so it can be co-opted. So join us in these fights, get Smith Boundary out, make sure East Phillips stays like fucking left and a thorn in not only Commissioner Kessler's ass, but also Mayor Fry's. And we'll do the same for your movements.
Thanks everybody for coming to the Imperialism, Environmental Destruction, and the Climate Crisis put on by WHAM and the Climate Justice Committee. Let's close it out. From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea,
Palestine will be free.